It is an absolute pleasure to be here back in this room. I think I can say, it's okay to say that the first person I met at the New York Studio School was Todd Bienvenu, and we were furiously stapling big sheets of paper to that wall right there.
That's right in the corner.
That's many, many years ago now, but it's awfully nice to be here. And thank you, Sam, for pulling this together. Thank you, Graham, for having us. It's a pleasure. I thought we would begin with looking. Everybody always likes to look at this school, and so I thought we'd start with that. Yeah, I think actually let's just get into that right now, and let me just make sure I know how to use the PowerPoint. I said yes, I know how to use this one. Okay, good, we're there. Images are by the artists alphabetically. We're going to begin with Todd Bienvenu's work, and let me see. I've got image list here and there. And there. So I'm good. All right. So this is the first image for Todd. This is called, very winningly, I think, Big Tat. Next. Let me know about pacing or anything like that. We've got a few images to get through, so I'll move through at a decent pace, but I know people's eyes work quickly. And I think, Todd, it's safe to say most of your paintings are fairly large, right?
Yeah,
most of these are...
The first one was 96 by 84. That's 67 by 76.
Oh, he really was a big tat.
Yeah,
That's
no,
really...
it's a big old 8-foot thing.
Nice, okay. This one is called Stage Dive. This one, Amsterdam Bike Crash.
Maybe, I think that's actually Copenhagen, I realized later.
Oh, that's okay when you're traveling and you get images blur and
sure. Colored buildings.
Hughes Street Subway. Toddy Moving Day. Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. I feel like I move studios every year, so this is carrying stretcher bars from one end of the neighborhood to the other.
Perfect. Lake Wichita, am I pronouncing it? Oh, okay, Washita. Sorry, of course. Actually, that's a complicated painting. I hope the resolution is okay enough. All right. Dwayne from Birmingham. Brooklyn in front, Manhattan in the back. Shake the sheets. Undies.
That one's small.
I was going to say that might be a small
thing.
Yeah. View from the Withe. Scorpion.
Now this one's called Insects of Wassaic.
Insects of Wassaic, that's right. And?
Venetian. Venetian blinds or something.
Oh yeah, here we are. Gotcha. Yeah. Venetian Royal Rumble. This one is Bronco versus Accord, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I had to, yeah, that's right. And Todd, are these all pretty recent, right?
Past 3 years.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. Next, we are moving on to the work of Julie Curtis. And I've got this here. This is Carapace, and some of the titles, obviously, probably more French than English, so I'll use the English pronunciations where it makes sense. This is 2017, and this is acrylic on canvas, 26 by 20, just to give an idea of, sort of the general sense of scale for most of these, I think. Chinatown poster. Oh, did I get that right?
I gave you the wrong caption.
It's Chinatown, that painting,
it's just
right?
Chinatown.
Yeah, it's not a poster, right?
It's not.
Right, that's what I wondered. So that's the painting, not the gouache.
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yes, right.
Gotcha, that's what I thought. This is Ice Cream 1 and 2. I heard a little ooh in the audience. That's nice. That's good. Entr'acte. Lateral Embrace. D'après Origine du Monde. Orlando. Fantastic title. Pas de Trois. The House Maiden. Jour de Fête. Triplette. Comb Through. and Food for Thought. So that's a really great group of images. All right, next we are on to Jenna's work. And this is Watching Me Swim. And this is 10 by 8 inches. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And all oil
Tiny.
on.
All oil and linen.
Yeah.
I think they're mostly very small, the ones that are in this group.
Yes, yeah. This is Watching Me Swim. Teleological suspension of the ethical. Is this one? Me looking at her, looking at me. Elizabeth working out poses for her Diana sculpture, 2019. Watching Me Paint. Mackenzie's lack of interest in Gallery 827. Working Mother. Pollyanna Wrestlers. Mackenzie, Jazzy, and Rita, did I pronounce that right?
Jossie.
Jazzy and Rita in my living room preparing to wrestle. To share a common memory. Waffle House at Night Wrestlers. Mutual pleasure. Keeping busy while she's on the phone. My place beside her in bed. Carolyn as Diana, Anne's bosom friend. Fantastic. So we'll move on to Alexi work now. Okay. This one's called Tangent from the narrative series Gerberman at Large. This one's 2002, might be noted. And yeah, just a sense of the scale of most of these.
This is, I've forgotten because this
Yeah.
is the oldest piece that
Yeah.
here, but it's smallish. It's
Mhm.
like, 20 by 28 or
Easel
something like
size,
that.
yeah.
Easel
Great,
size for
yeah,
sure.
Great. All right. Leaning Woman, 2011. Crumpled Drawing, Self-Portrait, 2011. Desktop, 2012. Green Bedroom, 2015. I'm just mentioning the heads because they're the years because they're chronological. Head with Hands, 2015. Shoreline, 2018. Keg Stand Music, and this is just from last year, 2019. Our Own Party, this year. Drinkers Study, and Double Drinkers in Studio, 2020. I'm hoping I moved through at a reasonable pace there, so that gives an idea of things. Sam, could I trouble you to have it just a little lighter in here? It's a little, just a touch. And I can just periodically, you know what I'll do is, we decided to keep some images up. We're not gonna loop or anything, we'll have them to refer to. So I think I'll just I'm gonna ask Jenna a question, actually. No, I'm gonna ask Julie a question. So I might go back a little, and then maybe we'll just sort of have the images here to refer to as needed. Let's get one of your works up. Okay, great. Yeah, if I sit maybe just a little here, it's just very bright. No, don't, don't move, Todd. We don't want to lose you. Absolutely. All right. So where to begin? It's a big topic, obviously, and I was just delighted when Sam asked me to participate in this because obviously it's such a great group of painters that he was thinking of. I thought, given the scope of the evening and what's going on, I thought it would be most interesting. I know if I were attending this panel, I would want to know more about the artists. I'd want to know what they were thinking about when they're making these works. And, there's a lot going on right now with figurative painting. It's, for the past several years now, but it's still considered, it's kind of a real moment for it. And, there's that instinct to want to find the source of what's going on, and what's the buzz about, what's everybody thinking about. I can't promise that we're going to get there tonight, because I'm not sure there is one thing, and I'm not sure we can track down one source. But of course, that was my instinct when I wanted to set out to try to moderate this, to see if we could get to, a few single ideas that might get distilled from this. Not sure that's going to happen, but I do know that I also personally am very interested in the instincts that go into making a painting. There's obviously different angles that you can talk about. You can talk about the implications, you can talk about the history. I tend to be interested in what the motivations are, what the instincts are that go into making a work. I think when those get teased out, then you start to learn a bit more about, I don't know, maybe what people, maybe there you might find some commonality or some areas of interest that might be shared more broadly. So that's my thinking. We'll see how that goes. I did want to start with a question for Julie. It's been a great pleasure to meet her through this. I was aware of the work, but it was lovely to meet her. And these are, the work is very powerful. It's very, what I was thinking was that it has an extremely succinct kind of surrealism, very tight exchange between, two or more things that just don't make sense. And there's a lot of cognitive tension in these works that I think keeps people, going back for more and more. And of course, there's the hair. Such a potent symbol to have in a painting. As Julie and I were discussing, it's obviously hair is such a seductive thing. It's such a wonderful thing to have in the right places, and such a worrying and troubling thing to have in the wrong places. And so it's, that kind of feeling that you have looking at the hair is wonderful. Of course, it's, as I say, it's just rich when applied to painting. Also made me think of Michael Fried, actually, who wrote about Courbet and, using the brush to paint the model's hair, and that kind of circularity of hair being sort of interwoven as a kind of connective tissue of the painting. And again, the connection between the artist and the subject also being intrinsic to that symbol as well. So very rich. I don't pretend, I don't want to speak for the artist. I just wanted to give a few thoughts before we began. And I guess I wanted to ask the artist, what occurred to me when I saw these works together is that I think there's maybe something interesting about the idea of, when one's working figuratively, of either painting a specific person or painting a general person. And that's not maybe so fleshed out. A specific person, I think, could still exist imaginatively. It doesn't mean it has to be a real person with a real identity, but there's a kind of embodied identity that I think is meant to be communicated through the painting. Then there's this idea of a general person, of something, a more, a broader image of what a person could be. And I think there's this sense of general in these works of sort of personhood expanded over many different motifs. And I thought that was very interesting. And the long and short of it, I guess I was wondering, is do you see these as figurative paintings? And are these paintings about people, would you say?
Yeah, I don't remember. I think when you came to the studio, I think we might have a brush over that, the specific and general in my work is, I think it's like a pivot, right? I always try to, it's a pretty important one in my work. As you might have noticed, I don't show faces, I don't portray faces, and that's obviously on purpose, because I think what I'm really trying to capture in my work it's a general image, and I want the viewer to come back home with the image in their mind. I want them to bring back home something, and that's why probably there's something a bit succinct or like simple in what I do, is because I'm more interested in the way images live in our heads. So I'm not trying to portray specific people in my work, although it's figurative, obviously, but I'm trying to more capture an idea of a person or an archetype. An archetype can be pretty precise, and I try to give it as much as, consistency. It needs to be like, you need to be able to, bite it. It needs to have like a certain resistance, right? But it needs also to be general enough that you'll be able to project yourself on, onto the archetype. Yeah, so to answer your question, I don't show the faces also partly because when I started to paint, I've always painted figuration. That's the way my brain works. But when I clearly decided not to paint faces because I just didn't know, I'm already pushing the boundary of illustration. I really like illustration and I like to see how far I can push that, but still not illustrate an idea. And I just didn't know what it was going to look like for me to paint a face. Was it going to be like a comic book face with simplified, little brown eyes and, Tintin face, or would it be like more a portrait, specific portrait? But that kind of felt like I was going to open a kind of worm. So at the end, I just decided to just avoid it and instead really crop the image around the subjects of my paintings and so leave a lot outside of the frame and have more these fragments of people that the viewer has to puzzle back. And I think it felt more satisfying to me to give the viewer, work to do, to complete the gaps with their imagination. And in a way, for me, that's a way to kind of address ideas of identity and, the elusiveness, I don't know if you say that, of identity. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. I did just jot down, because I'm in jotting notes, you need to be able to bite it, you said, of your work. And it's interesting, too, I think it just could be noted that you're currently working on some sculptures as well.
Yes.
You didn't have to say that. I just thought it might be interesting in relation that you do physical objects as well, in addition to paintings.
Yeah, and I think it's, my work is more, I guess people know more my paintings, but I've always had a pretty, I've always alternated sculpture work and paintings, but the sculpture never felt very resolved in a way, and that's why I didn't show it as much, but they really helped my painterly practice. Like one fits the other, but lately I've been more confident about them and really trying to include them more, in my practice and showing them. So right now I'm working on I was in Japan for 2 months and I worked, I don't know if you guys seen the food displays in front of restaurants that are uncannily realistic in Japan. So I'm working on that, on like the kind of half ready-mades. I take, it's plastic food or wax food, and I kind of make it my own by adding some of my personal sculptures. So they're these weird, like surrealistic
May I describe
sculptures.
one? Is that okay to share?
Of course, yes.
There was one when I went to the studio that's a lovely, beautifully presented bowl of pasta, but guess what? The noodles are not presented like noodles. They're a perfect part down the center of your bowl, so it's like you're looking at spaghetti noodles with a little bit of, tomato sauce done with a nice lacquer, and so you're looking right down at the part of a head, but with noodles as the hair. And the effect is just, again, that immediate kind of seduction and repulsion all going on at the same time. It's very, it's an interesting angle to your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just, as I was mentioning to the artists, I wanted to just, get a few general questions going to each artist to get a sense of the work and then see if some other things come up. So I also wanted to move on to Todd. Let's go back a few images.
Can I just throw in that
do.
idea, Julie, that sculpture is an important kind of hidden part of your practice? It's one of those little things that to me is so helpful. Like I feel like I see that immediately, and to me it helps explain why, your work would seem to be kind of like a post-cartooning Chicago style thing, and yet it feels different from that. And to me, that immediately helps me understand why it is that it feels different from what it should look like.
That's nice. Yeah. And just to add to that too, when you said, post-Chicago cartooning, and I actually had, we talked a bit about the graphic quality to the works too, and as Julie said, she wants people to live with the images, to kind of take them home. And I thought we had a nice moment we were talking about, saying, when things are graphic, they exist more readily in your head than a more experiential kind of thing, like an all-over painting. Like we compared it to a Pollock. and that idea of something being discreet and something you can carry with you, something being more portable, I thought was very, was an interesting idea in relation to, you know, a more painterly approach. And sort of relates to sculpture, something that you can hold, you know. It's an interesting thought. So I wanted to move on to Todd's work, and I don't want to go on too long, so I'll begin just, you know, with a very simple statement that I got to say, Todd, my view of your work changed doing this panel and preparing for it.
In a good way or a bad way?
All good, all good. Well, in
It's
the
fine.
sense that, yeah, no, we can have, there's lots of things we can discuss. I always, I mean, I know you're...
Christine was picking fights backstage.
By the way, is the volume okay? They adjusted my mic. If something's not good, speak up. I know you're a good painter, and I know your history, and your attitude towards tradition, and those things I'm familiar with. But I always liked that, you know, that interest got translated into, you know, very fresh, obviously very funny contemporary issues. You know, one could say, you know, they feel very Williamsburg. They might feel at a certain time and place, you know, quite specifically, which is
which is a
good thing. But I saw them on that level, and I liked them. I got to say, doing this panel and spending more time with them, I was really struck by the fact that I think they're actually quite, I think they're unique, and I think they're very, very gentle paintings. I think they're some of the gentlest paintings I've seen in a long time.
Does not like it.
Thank you. That's kind of you to say.
Well, so it's just something that struck me as I was going through.
I'm very sensitive.
And I was trying to track down where I was getting that feeling from. And again, it goes back to my interest in, you know, the instinct of the painting. But I think it really stems
I think
from...
they're made with love. I mean, it's about
Yeah.
the stuff that I'm into. So,
Yeah.
like, I've always wanted to do like a Big Lebowski or a Seinfeld painting, but I wasn't brave enough to do it. And then I figured out this painting, for instance, the Tattooed Man. I can like put a Big Lebowski tattoo on him and like get away, like convince myself that it's okay to do that. Like,
Did you get halfway toward the Seinfeld painting, or?
well, there's Jerry's on his right shoulder,
Oh, yeah.
and George is to the left. It says Georgie Boy and Jerry Steinfeld or something. And there's like a whole bunch of little, and there's like Super Mario, and there's dick jokes, and there's you know, you can sort of like pick it apart.
There's a lot of dick jokes in your paintings.
I haven't noticed that. I mean, different viewers see different things, but
But I was wondering, so okay, that answers my question a little bit, because I was curious as to how conscious that your sort of stance towards the subject is. Because I think it's pretty rare. I think a lot of people would be painting some of the things that you paint with maybe more of a critical angle, or maybe more judgmental, but there's actually, that's not the case. I mean, I don't think it was very funny, you mentioned that somebody met you at one of your shows. They said, oh, I thought you'd be some huge guy, and, you know, because there's that.
The figures have started getting more fat as I approached 40. Like, and then the last show was called Dad Bod. My girlfriend's starting to make fun of my gut a little bit, so I'm starting to get a little self-conscious of it, and so the figures are starting to like plump up and like lose their hair, and I don't know, like my mental image of myself is getting altered as I get older, I guess.
I think it has a little something to do maybe with the volume of the people too. I mean, you also paint girlfriends and things too. I was noticing the
Well, she gets mad at me if I make her boobs too big.
Right,
So
right.
you gotta like.
There's a lot of implications with figurative painting. There's a lot of things to discuss.
I mean, and again, I feel like I can be sort of like hard on myself in a way that, like, if you distort like a female figure in a painting, maybe that would like make people think something that there's like you're like what do you call it, misogynist or something.
Yeah, that's a whole issue, isn't it? But no, I do see what you're saying. But for example, in this Copenhagen bus.
All right, so this is this is based on something that almost happened. We were in Copenhagen, and my girlfriend's dad, who's English or Irish, he almost got hit by a bike because he was looking the wrong direction.
Oh my gosh!
And so I was like, well, that's a painting, you know.
Yeah. Because I mean, if it's people at a very vulnerable moment, isn't it? I mean, maybe the most vulnerable, or
well, there's been a lot of crashes and bike crashes and people falling downstairs, people falling in the shower. I think, like I grew up drawing comic books and stuff, so I feel like that like kinetic energy is something that's really important to me. And so I think you get, I'm interested in painting, like, and also you can, like, with this one, you can abstract it, like,
With the bike one?
well, no, with this one here, with the subway one, like, you know, the hands and the feet and the figure, they don't necessarily need to make sense, but I can sort of like, oh, well, I can put a pink bit here, I can put a complicated bit here, I can, you can kind of just like paint without having to like, oh, well, the head doesn't fit or something. You can just sort of put stuff in there, like fractalize it or something.
Because in a way, you would think that there'd be things to make fun of. I mean, you know, you do skateboarders crashing and wiping out, and you do a lot of people, or people really drunk. That's like another aspect of the work.
I've sobered up, so I quit painting drunk people. But
did the painting stop too? I thought you were still painting. Like,
I think so. Well, I don't know. I mean, I still paint people smoking cigarettes. I miss that. I don't miss the hangovers. So I don't think I've been painting or drinking as well.
But there's a sense of, you know, sort of being very gentle with people at their most absurd moments. And I was curious, so that's a very conscious thing for you, that when you go back into your kind of treasure trove of imagery, whether it be, you know, from college days and this, maybe I'm not reading this right. I mean, maybe it's more contemporaneous.
I think as I got older, I started to think about being a teenager, and, you know, I don't have any children, but when my dad was my age, he had 3, you know, like, you know, 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 5, like, I've got dead house plants, like I can't imagine. Like, you know, so I'm just sort of thinking about that, thinking about him, and thinking about him getting old. Yeah. So I think, you know, that Bronco versus Accord painting was when I was 16. My brother was there. I wrecked a whole bunch of cars when I was learning how to drive, just being a jackass.
Like more than one?
Yeah, yeah.
So, because I asked you about this painting, I was like, this one was a little rough for me, and you're like, no, the people are okay.
Everybody's fine.
Everybody's fine, okay.
But again, like, I wanted to paint like I've done a painting before. I used to drive a Bronco when I was in high school. I had this big blue truck, and, you know, I was just going through my memories and trying to find stuff. I feel like I'm always looking for stuff to paint. I feel like the biggest thing I do is like, what's the next painting going to be about? And then I realized if I did a crash painting, I could do that like fractured space, and it wouldn't just be like a painting of a car. Like it would be like you know, I don't have to get a photo to work from. I just like pick fun colors.
You don't work from photographs, generally speaking?
Not while I'm painting, no.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want it to look like a photo. I want it to look like a mess.
That's a good. I think that's a good stopping point. Just to move on to one other artist, or let's do a question 2.
But can I just ask about that? Because I have like a stream of car crash drawings that I've worked on for years. Yeah. I could never make a painting of. It just doesn't work for me. I'm always tempted by the subject. What makes it work for you? Like, why? I
don't know. Well, I've thought about. I did some research and looked up one of your old lectures where you're talking about there's these door key paintings, and I feel like I'll be like going through my Instagram and I'll find a picture like, oh, that'd be a good painting, but it won't. Like, it's too specific, or like there's some issue where like it would fall like too much on the side of illustration for me, where I wouldn't be able to just like put colors down.
But I thought of it more in terms of the violence. Like, the violence does stay, like Christina was saying, warm-hearted somehow, comic, and yet those are the paintings where you come closest, when, like the bicycle crash, the car crash, where it seems like we feel maybe most clearly your kind of the feeling that it would be wrong if it was a fatal collision for the spirit of your work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want. You know, like you wake up and read the newspaper and it's horrible, and like I'll like never paint Donald Trump. You know, like I don't want my painting world to be gross. I want it to be like fun and like. I mean, the paintings are serious. I feel like I want it to be like, oh, well, that's like a real painting, but I don't want it to be like the tone to be sort of cynical. I want it to be like I paint my girlfriend. I paint like the people in my life that are important to me. You know.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're painting moments?
Well, sometimes, but I feel like usually I just like I have no ideas, and then like I'll start painting, and it'll lead to another painting, it'll lead to another painting, it'll lead to another painting. So like I started thinking about getting old and fat, and so like I did a painting of this like male nude reclining on a bearskin rug in front of a fire, and then I was like, I was thinking about high school, and I started thinking about crashing the cars, and I started thinking about bike wrecks, and like it just sort of, like I don't have any ideas until I've like made a bad painting or something.
Interesting.
But to me, it's interesting, like the comedy and warm-heartedness of the spirit of your work, which is so clear.
Yeah.
Like, how does that feel? It could feel disambitious, right? It could feel like it was nice.
Well, I guess it's
And
just
that's
being
that's the
instead, or I mean, like I feel like I enjoy being in there and I enjoy making them. Like, but I don't know. I don't feel cynical about making art. I feel like it's something I love to do. And again, I wouldn't deign to paint something that like I'm not interested in painting.
Fantastic.
Like I can't like I've done some like gory paintings. I've done some like I don't know, but they always seem like funny. I don't know. I hope.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about Alexi's paintings here too, because there was this bizarre overlap. I happened to find out, if it's okay to say, you guys actually have studios in the same building,
Yeah,
which I didn't.
We're neighbors.
Yeah, which I didn't know until this all came about, and that's not that material. But then there was this bizarre overlap because I think of you as very, very different painters, obviously. But then there were these funny party scenes that were coming up in your works as well. And then the idea of, the double drinking and the seeing things through this lens of, just, as you were saying, just one wine glass. The double drinking ones you were saying are not about drunkenness. They are about sort of that moment when things are wonderful beforehand. That's how you think of those paintings.
or confusing.
Yeah, or confusing. That's a good point. But not necessarily the full kind of bacchanal that you have here. But I did think it was kind of an interesting connection that there's, similarity in subject matter, but such different treatment. When I think of your work, I think of, puzzles and play, and there's, again, a lightheartedness, but also, quite a cerebral complexity to them. There's almost always some kind of very interrupted or there's a complication thrown in between, the viewer and the subjects in the painting, and there's a lot of, we were talking about thumbs in front of the lens, there's, strange lighting. It's very hard to situate yourself sometimes as a viewer, or rather it's very immediate, the situation. The scale is very problematic in relation to, an actual person sometimes. There's a lot of, like, almost an Alice in Wonderland feel. There's so many plays going on in this. And I think they're incredibly clever paintings, I wanted to say, but I also wanted to say that sort of dance that seems to be done to get to the subject, that doesn't feel clever or overly premeditated. It feels very innate to you, which I think is an interesting quality to the paintings. I had an interesting moment when after I visited your studio. I had a really interesting thought about this one, or a nice memory of it, because I was commenting when I saw this painting how I liked the auras happening around the arms that are right in the foreground there with that very harsh front lighting. And you said to me, if I'm getting it right, you said, those are your arms. You're the one holding, is this called keg stand? If anybody's familiar, it's when you like headstand on a keg and you drink upside down. And
Christina knows.
I do now. But anyways, he said, those are your arms. And I was like, oh, that's rather shocking, but okay. And then it wasn't until the subway ride home that I thought, no, they're the artist's arms. And so I guess what I'm getting at is there's a lot of yous in this painting. It's you, no, it's you. There's this feeling of who's implicated in this painting. You're good. Someone might have just saved Todd's life, so we're grateful for that. So that kind of play I find very enticing and very seductive in the works. So I guess I was really wondering, could you talk a bit about that dance, or I think you used the word the courtship, of getting to the painting, and why? What do you think's going on there? In so many of the works, there is this complicating factor that makes it very playful. What, how you come to that instinct to do that with the way the painting is set up and viewed?
Well, some of it was just desperately thinking about a point of view that would be fresh, a literal point of view. Like, I feel like that's something. I actually had a studio visit many years ago, like before I was showing with DC Moore, and I talked about point of view in the studio visit. I said something about how I was interested in point of view, and the dealer, this is Derek Eller, not that it matters, but so he said thoughtfully, he said like, so like, for example, which ones? And I was like, well, maybe that one, kind of. And he was like, and anyway, I just realized I was kind of bluffing, or I had a talking point that wasn't really in the work. And
that's interesting.
And so after that, I was like, I was embarrassed, but I also felt like, actually, I really want to do that. I said it because it was an aspiration. It wasn't in the work yet, and I shouldn't have, said so. But so for a long time, I've been thinking about that. But that's something, Jenna, you're also very interested in point of view, right? That a lot of those paintings of yours are playing with point of view in a very deliberate way as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But you don't have a microphone.
I mean, I feel like this is still your question, but it's
deflecting, complicating.
It's definitely central to what I'm concerned with.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things I like about looking at your work that I recognize immediately. And if I'm supposed to answer the question, since this whatever embarrassing studio visit, it's always been a big thing in my work to be thinking on the one hand about the point of view that I feel like digital cameras also bring it home to us all the time, that we're always looking, our lens is in our hand, and that has offered kind of opportunities for unusual points of view that a painting might as well just make use of. And then I think about the opposite, like in this painting, like the kind of lateral kind of proscenium format that you see in children's drawings or in theaters, or that's those two things. In one, we're very individualized, and in the other, we're like like you guys, like a crowd, like we're not in any one position. And I feel like that's actually more normal, more human. The point of view thing is counterintuitive, even though it's mechanical and accurate. Anyway, so a lot of my work comes from thinking about those two things as opposite, the proscenium versus the POV.
I see. Just to clarify, and forgive me if I'm being a little dense, when you talk about the point of view, that it's more you're saying it's more natural to go through the world and to have, does it relate at all to what I was saying about the specific and the general, that you're just sort of aware more of people's surroundings and aware of the way the room feels right now. If we were to close our eyes, we'd say, oh, there's people there, there's people there, there's people there. And if you were to recreate that painting, you'd have those kind of presences, but they would be blurred and generalized and a little...
Yeah, point of view is too specific because you're in an actual, like if you have the point of view of this bottle looking at you, that's could happen, but it would be like nothing that a human nothing like the intuition of how things look.
Although there is the act of sitting still and looking closely, there is the decision to create a point of view, which precedes having a lens that maybe, I'm thinking more traditionally of painting that hints towards a certain frame of mind. When you to choose to draw someone relates to your work, obviously. To choose to really sit down and sketch somebody, relevant to the school as well, it's still. I'm not saying I guess I would just say it's not unnatural. It's just a distinct state of mind, other than what we would normally use passing through the world. Does that ring true at all? Does that relate to your work?
I'm going to disagree about the non-natural. That's my own point of view, so to speak, on this. Is that that you look around like. Art, folk art, children's art from other cultures, you see the proscenium format again and again, this long horizontal format with figures vertically across it. This isn't exactly, this painting I was saying is connected to it, like it, but it's not the same.
Right.
But I do think that's the natural visual format.
Okay. That's interesting.
And that everything else is unnatural, but that doesn't... But
like much of the Western canon is unnatural, you'd say. The point of view, the POV.
Well, a lot of the Western paintings still like that. Poussin's that, every time.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I think it's like the way we look through our cameras, the stuff you see on Instagram, a lot of those images are unnatural in that sense, but they feel natural to us now.
Right. Yeah.
This is like more of my pet theory than you needed, really.
No, that's what I wanted to hear about. Can you talk a bit about the lighting in your work? What's a good example of that? Because you were addressing, this, as you said, photography is always sort of in the background of your work, so that you're clearly not working from photographs. that it exists as this idea, and the light source is really, again, it relates to the viewer, it relates to the artist. It's almost like the artist is the light source of their own painting. What are some of the thoughts there to do with the lighting?
Well, they're connected to all what I was just saying, but frontal lighting is lighting that's kind of coming from the spectator side.
Mm-hmm.
And I got interested a long time ago in working with that kind of explicitly. So in some, I did paintings that sort of started this whole chain of thought where I put the light source right behind my head and my own shadow. My hair began to fry, but my, the shadow fell across, and you could just have the stupidest kind of portrait scenario suddenly made, its kind of basic structure was kind of suddenly more obvious. So a lot of these paintings, like even this one, it's hard to see here, but there's a proximity shadow right in the lower center that's like falling over this fist.
Oh yeah, I see that.
And like in the beach painting that you showed before, there's a proximity shadow that's a cloud.
Mm-hmm.
But they come from that same thing about nearness and the implication of the viewer, and some of it comes out of, like, you were talking about Michael Fried, six people writing in the 60s about the implicit presence of the viewer. All of that was all happening in abstraction. And I thought, why couldn't it happen in figuration, too?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you for that. That's a nice, interesting summary for me, and actually, again, brought up some things I hadn't thought of before, which is great. Let me see if I can get to, oh wait, I have to go backwards. W comes last. All right, where's a good place to start here? Jenna, it was so lovely to get your images. They just kind of just bloomed all over my screen. They're so yummy. I mean, forgive me for using such a not appropriate term, but that was, I think that's what kind of provoked the feeling. It's like, wow, this presentation, they are so much, it seems to me, to do with the real delight of painting. Painting as this absolutely sensual, present. Really, they're love paintings, it seems to me, like a love poem or a love story. Not that they don't have, complexity and, variation within them, but they do all seem to come from a place of, just absolute engagement with the visual world and making things as lush and as tactile and as present as possible. And of course, there's, there are the figures who I imagine are all known people, given, the titles and the way the works seem. They very much to do with specific people and known people. And it occurred to me as I was going through, and I looked at many other images as well, other than what you sent me, and I know your work outside of this. It seemed to me, I want to go to the great title one. It's a very sexy painting. It's this one, this is a Waffle House, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And it occurred to me a little bit that your works, they all seem to, I was trying, you approaching work, you're trying to find commonalities, and they all seem to be like that moment when, now I don't pretend to have, such parties as this, but, or maybe it's a dock or a pool, or like when the night gets really fun, like when something happens, something else happens, and then you're really having a good time. And it seems like your paintings really hit that kind of high note of every night, or of a really good night, a very special night. I guess maybe it doesn't relate to all of the ones hanging out in studios, but it could be too. It could be too that, painting for you, it's almost like is, they depict places where you're having fun, where there's beautiful connections made with people, where there's sensuality. And it seemed to me there's this kind of feeling that there's that space within the paintings, and then that the overall project as a whole is also that. And it made me feel like all of painting is your Waffle House, if you know what I mean. Like it's all this sort of place you go into where interesting things happen. And I wonder if that was at all true. In terms of, what I wanted to ask you about your work, I guess it would really come down to the specificity of the people, given that they do feel, in many cases, like love paintings in some ways. Let's go to the first one. It's really wonderful. What's your sort of stance towards the person you're painting? And then what does the painting accomplish? Does it amplify the affection or the the attachment to the person? Does it, does the person become kind of a function by which to, you know, explore these feelings of, you know, total presence and sensuality? I was just wondering about what's the stance? Is the person, how does the person exist in the painting? Is it very important that they are them and then they continue to be projected as them as people are looking at the painting? Or can they sort of become something else? How does that specificity exist in the world? That's what I wanted to ask.
Okay. So I feel like there are a lot of questions
Yes,
in there.
yes,
But
yeah.
so you're right to say that the paintings are romantic, and I feel like they're love paintings in a way, but I think painting was really my first love. And my relationship to the medium is kind of dramatically romantic in a way that I am conscious of how almost kind of campy that is, my romance around the medium. But also specifically a lot of them do depict my romantic relationship. This, for example, is my girlfriend. And so this one, Watching Me Swim, and the lushness and beauty of it also, I have this kind of idea that a painting can, you know, beauty in a painting can be a kind of a Trojan horse, and pull people in and you know, kind of hook them, and then you sort of get the ideas in when after you've convinced them that they want to spend time looking at it. Anyway, so the paintings also are largely concerned with the way we construct personal narrative, and the way that in this kind of era of hyper documentation, the way that photography and the constant photographing of our lives sort of affects the way we construct personal narrative, and kind of warps things, and also doesn't warp them, the way that, you know, when I think back on experiences from before I had a camera in my pocket all the time, it's a different experience remembering something than it is now when I kind of just revert back to a photographic image. So the paintings really hold hands with photographic imagery, and that way they utilize a lot of photography, but then the things warp and shift in a way that kind of is meant to refer to the experience of what it is to remember something in relation to a photograph or not. And
can I just throw in that, to me, the clouds are that happening in an especially clear, fun way, where like those kind of fingerprint clouds or whatever are so counter-photographic, so clearly just a kind of little act of will.
Yeah.
And to me, that's where I see you kind of arguing with photography, or the deck, the wooden boards of the deck in the little kid swimming one. Another place where it felt like it was just, you're making that, it's on the side, it's on the periphery, but you're making it very explicit.
Yeah, and so a lot of those moments are painted from memory or just from my mind, and I like to kind of like have those things work together and see what happens. And the clouds are meant to be very playful and also kind of funny. It's kind of like, oh, what were the clouds? And then you try to like remember, and they just look like cartoons, and I kind of like it when that happens. But to go back to the image of Watching Me Swim, this was the beginning of kind of trying to describe also, to speak to something about the experience of this moment and the kind of voyeuristic nature of this moment that we're in, and the experience of what it is to be a person in the world who is always looking and also being looked at, and the kind of the like painting in the feedback loop of that experience. Yeah. So you're looking at this painting and you're kind of, to me it's a very sexy painting because being watched in this way, like first of all, the implication is that the me is swimming and that's my bathing suit on the chair. So I'm the nude body in the painting, and she's half clothed but kind of watching me intently in a way that's kind of sexy. And so the nude figure isn't the thing that creates the sexiness in the painting. The nude figure is kind of out of the frame. Right. But yeah, they're all concerned with kind of looking and being looked at, and the voyeuristic nature of figurative painting, and what that means.
This
kind of.
one.
Yeah, so this one
Okay.
is me looking at her, looking at me, and again, like figuring out a way to put myself in the painting. So it's like, oh, I'll just paint it from her perspective. That would be weird. But also, this one was important to me to paint, make a painting of two women in a romantic relationship. So it's a very romantic painting, but it's also not sexual. It's you know, just sitting on the couch and reading and writing and.
Wait, that's not sexual?
No, I mean, I don't think so.
100% sure?
I think it's, yeah, we're just.
What I love about that painting is that it's like a gay relationship as a mirror. It seems like it's, I was confused at first.
Yeah,
I thought maybe there
exactly.
was a mirror. And then I thought, wow, like if the two people are the same gender, in a way, there's a mirroring that doesn't happen in a heterosexual relationship. And that's, I felt like you turned it into a theme in a way that I totally didn't expect.
Yeah, I like that it's kind of confusing and that it takes a while to disentangle the limbs, you know, and kind of like you're like, who's what, you know?
Yeah.
Anything that can kind of convince the viewer that they need to spend a little bit longer looking is good for me.
Of course,
I think.
yeah, as a pro, absolutely. I think it's relevant here. It's a very basic question, but do you work for models ever? That, because since you are talking about that idea of looking, you know, viewing voyeurism, the idea of an actual person posing. Well, this one, for the one where there's in the studio, that seems like she was watching. It's called Watching Me Paint, right?
Yes. Yeah, she's in my studio, but that's my girlfriend in
Yes.
my studio. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's also from a photograph.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it's kind of meant to look. It
Oh,
plays
so-
off of the tradition of these kinds of paintings, which were all painted from life. But
Right.
I prefer to work from photographs because I like how you can kind of extract a moment that existed in time and, you know, do something else with it in another place. So, and you know, combine multiple moments. The wrestler paintings actually are all are slightly different than the more kind of intimate paintings. The wrestling paintings are based on photos that I take at these kind of gatherings at my home. I have my friends come over and sort of these wrestling parties, make them wrestle. It's
Yeah.
anyway. But then they're all kind of superimposed on memories from my past. So the Waffle House wrestlers, that's just a very. I spent a lot of time as a teenager sitting in the Waffle House, like drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, and you know, it's just like a very evocative memory for me.
Yes.
And I like the idea of what is the experience of kind of superimposing a present moment on the past. So these wrestlers are all people that I know, friends, kind of superimposed on something that reminds me of a past version of myself.
Right.
So, and I think it's kind of trippy to just
Yeah.
consider those things. The only one that there were two Pollyanna wrestlers actually, and this is one of the ones is included in this, and they're the only ones that don't have a background that comes from a real physical memory that I have,
Okay.
because they're based on interiors in the film Pollyanna. But for me, that is as real a place to go back to, because it was, when I was a child, it was one of the only films that we had on VHS, and I watched it almost every day of my life for about 2 years straight. I had this like insane fixation on that film. And so now I can kind of return to that, and it feels like a real place, even though it's nowhere that I actually went. And so that painting operates in a slightly different way than the other wrestler paintings.
Yeah. So in terms of the people being specific, obviously, you know, these are all done, you know, with people's, you know, they're kind of in on the project very much. And so there's obviously an intimacy there, there's a comfort level there.
I mean,
I guess I'm wondering, like, is it more important, this is maybe a really flat-footed question, I didn't write it down first, but is it more important that it be of the person or that it be a good painting? You know, I mean, is one in service to the other? Do you ever think about that kind of tension? Because I think you're actually, in some ways, you're the only person, well, no, Todd, you as well, doing very, well, actually, Alexi, too. Real people sometimes figure in your works, too. They can be, when you are working with someone, say a girlfriend or someone you love, and, the instinct to, have as much of that experience of, the adoration for that person in the work, does it ever fight with the painting itself?
Yeah.
Does that happen?
I think the stakes are much higher when it's a person that is in your life.
Yeah.
It has to feel right, like them for some reason, even though it doesn't really matter to the world at large if it really feels like that specific person. But I think to me it's important if I'm depicting someone that's really in my life, that it really feel like them and look like them. And so sometimes that can be tricky, but because I play around with ideas of objectification and the implications of the voyeuristic nature of painting, I don't really feel comfortable just having a kind of generic this is just a somebody.
Right.
So all of my models are really aware of what they're participating in, and they're all kind of game / complicit, however you want to call it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, fantastic! I've really enjoyed getting this sense of each of you, and I sort of thought we're actually at the hour mark now, and that's usually when we wrap up. But I think for a 4-person panel, I think it would be nice to just delve a little bit deeper into a few issues. So I had a few questions that would be fun if people just wanted to bat around a little bit. One thing that occurred to me while I was looking, figurative painting is so exciting and so full of possibilities. Anybody can be anything, any play, you can do superimposing places. There's so much you can do. It can also be really messy in terms of the way things are perceived. Every single, as we know when we study paintings, every single object or item in it can be read a certain way. And I had that thought, Julie, looking at that wonderful hairdryer in one of your paintings. Now, forgive me, it might not be in this particular one, but when you do sort of almost like prop-like things with the figure around them, and even something as simple as a hairdryer, well, that's either it dates it of a certain time and place, or it has its implication, and all of that tension of objects and everything, it seemed like I got overwhelmed with thinking like there's just so much going on, and it's particularly in terms of dating and time and place. And I guess I was curious with all of you, how important is it to you that your works be of a certain time and place, or that they be of now as opposed to some other time? If that question makes sense, yeah.
That's a good question.
Yay, Todd, go for it.
No, well, I mean, no, it's a good question. I mean, I feel like, if you look back on like style, you're like, I don't want my paintings to look like the 80s or something, like in a negative way. But if you just paint like a naked figure, that could be of like any time, Yeah. So, but I do want them to feel contemporary, and so they are, and. Someone else say something.
No,
I have a
please.
thought. I mean, we are in this time where we have information from every time so readily at our fingertips, and I think that to you can kind of skirt along history so easily just on your laptop or something. So for me, to make something look very much of this time, you can kind of look at every time. So I like to think of like referring to different eras of art history as a way it's like a form of time travel within a painting. So you can kind of move through time with the way that you're painting, and maybe that makes it of this time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that sense of infinite possibilities, very strong. Pardon me, just checking my time.
But you're describing a kind of knowingness that like we're all kind of almost scholarly, because there's so much art history that's available that we, in a way, can't pretend we don't have access, especially rich, but I worry kind of superficial access.
Yeah, I think it's like I think the way that we take in information is at this time it's kind of characterized by a cursory kind of skimming of things. So it's not necessarily, it's kind of the opposite of scholarly in a way, but it's these sort of impressions that you get, and you're like, oh, I read that somewhere, I picked that up, but I don't even know when or where, because you take in so much information all the time. but I feel like that is the feeling of this time,
That's
and
the
this
feeling,
skirting
yeah.
along on the surface of things.
So it's okay to say, grab a little houseplant that looks like something Manet would have on a bar top,
Yeah.
or to sort of put something like that in. It's okay if your hairdryer looks a little retro, or that kind of thing. That feels right to you in terms of the painting. Todd, you seem to be quite set on the specificity of time and place. It seems to me like it's
Yeah, but it's also sort of annoying because I can't just like sit down and make a painting because well, what kind of shoes are they wearing? Or
Yeah.
like,
But you would
gotta
never-
like sort
yeah.
of think things through instead of just being like, I just want it to be green here and like move on to the next thing
Yeah.
in a way. But again,
But you would never just, for example, say, oh, I'm just going to do a nice rich purple cloth behind, because guess what? People have been doing nice rich purple cloths behind figures for so many hundred years
Well, I
that
think that's
maybe...
it. I want to make a painting
Yeah.
that I haven't seen before.
Right.
I feel like that's a big, something that's
Yeah.
super important to me. Is like, I love art history, but I don't want to paint like any of those people. I want it to be my own thing, and like
Yeah.
maybe that's a viewpoint, or maybe that's a
Mhm.
compositional thing, or finding an image on the phone or whatever. But
Mhm.
but it's sort of like all fair game though.
Yeah.
It's like stifling. Like, how do you even start when you can do it? You can
Yeah, I
go in
think
there and like write a song. I mean,
It's like, as funny as you say, you kind of want to make a painting that people have never seen before, because I feel like I kind of want to do almost a painting that maybe people think or are confused, maybe they've seen before. Maybe that's why I'm getting into so much trouble lately. But like, but yeah, but I kind of like that. That's why also I place everything I do in a weird place. It's like we were talking about the hair dryer, and of course everything is on purpose. So when I'm thinking I'm going to put a hair dryer here, mostly for composition reason, but also whatever. But then how is it going to look like? I want it to be red because it's going to look good. But also, it's also like then this never-ending like research on the internet. Red hair dryer.
Yeah.
That's the one. Okay, it's vague enough. It's kind of the idea of hair dryer you have in your head if you're thinking hair dryer. But then I'm gonna add something really weird on top, like really something specific that you don't see really in life on a hair dryer.
Right.
So it's really like it's kind of a weird. We're back to that specific general kind of issue or topic. But when I do things weirdly, I like to place things in the past. I don't know why I do that, but I like them. That's why there's this kind of retro colors or retro quality, but with like kind of a modern, take on them. It's maybe I don't know why. Maybe it's just personal preference, but also reference to history and art history, and I like to create that ambiguity where you're not really sure what time period you're looking at,
Also, you brought up the idea when I was at your studio of, pop culture versus all culture, and I wondered if anybody had any thoughts. Alexi, do you have any thoughts on, popular culture? Does that figure in your works, or is it something you think about? Or the earlier question of how important is the time and place?
I'm still stuck on the earlier question,
Yeah.
because I thought that was such a fun answer, Julie. To me, it emphasized the way that a kind of blunt contemporaneity, a kind of like earnest, like, well, my work needs to be of now, so I'll do X, Y, Z, ends up feeling flat and transparent. And to me, like, your answer suggested a kind of intuitive, like more surprising and way of feeling that you could be of this time, and your work could be not by sort of saying, I'll do some little complicated, trick with my fingers that you haven't seen before, but the opposite almost. That seemed really right to me. And I think that's what, figurative painting has the burden of, maybe feeling more conservative than almost anything else, or at least that, it's certainly that's a shadow falling over all of us. And I think you want to have the appetite to do something that feels fresh, but it has to come. It has to come almost from the side, or kind of inadvertently and seep in.
Very interesting. I don't know if this is a good last question. Maybe it's a terrible one, but I was sort of wondering. Again, it can be very, very fraught territory, and I think like any kind of endeavor, you have to turn a little bit of a blind eye to all the things that could go wrong in terms of the reception of the work. Not unlike hair that has its, good places and its bad places. A badly drawn figure can be revolting, or a badly thought through painting can be very troubling if you have, human bodies involved in places. I mean, there's so much going on in figurative works. And I just wondered, maybe you touched on it, Alexi, but what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the problems with figurative painting generally? Is it something you think of? Are there things that you run up against in your own practice that you think, whether it be in the reception of the work or the production of the work, that you find, a challenge unique to the way you're working? Go for it, Alexi. I see a smirk.
Well, there's so many, but I mean, it's too quickly intelligible. We're trained to read bodies, so we read bodies super fast, and that slowing down the viewer. And yet, obviously, we're probably all doing this because we have the appetite to see people and bodies, and that's a giant magnetic pleasure in the work. So I feel like all figurative painters are caught on that. Between the hunger to slow and complicate and that basic raw appetite to have a body there in the center that we can feast on.
Nice.
I think that I think a lot about the kind of sticky terrain of figurative painting and what that involves and how to address it. And actually the fluorescent pink nipples that people ask about a lot of times, like why are these nipples so fluorescent pink all the time? I think it has to do with, maybe go back to the
studio one?
Yeah, that one. Just for some reason the color in the Diana one is like
Little
extreme. But I guess for me that's a way of focusing literally on that issue, but you put fluorescent nipples and something that you've been told your whole life you're not supposed to look there. You're supposed to look away, but then if they're fluorescent pink, you can't help it, and your eyes are like being constantly dragged back. And I like the idea that it helps the viewer remain kind of conscious of the fact that they're consuming an image of a body, and to just kind of make it a little the viewing experience maybe a little bit uncomfortable, just to raise some questions and highlight very literally again the voyeuristic nature of what it is to look at a figurative painting. And I feel like we're so numb to that in a way because we've looked at them for so many centuries. It's kind of like, but wait, this is a body of a specific person, and you're looking at it, and you're looking at their breasts right now, and like you're looking at this is a nude person, and like I don't know, I guess I don't want to let the viewer off the hook so easily, to just like have this nice aesthetic experience that can just be a nice picture on the wall, so it's kind of keeps them on the hook a little bit or something.
Right.
I feel like there's a bit of a weird narrative about abstraction versus figuration, as if it's a irreconcilable kind of thing between the two, and we are in that binary mode of alternating between one or the other.
Of course.
And I think it's a shame. I think there's when we talk about figuration, there's so many ways you can you can participate into an image in a way that's much more, can be conceptual, or there's some figurative forms that are extremely minimal, like John Wesley, is considered a minimal pop artist, So I think it's, it's nice to think out of the box, I think, for this concept, and not be so, rigid about them.
I get exactly what you're saying. I agree. Yes. Lexi, anything else? Any other challenges you want to raise? Any other problems? Any other? No?
No, I find it really easy.
All right, that's an
No, I'm
excellent.
teasing. No,
I think that's
it's impossible.
I think that's an excellent place to close. If there might be some questions, if people want to maybe bring up the lights a little bit. see if anybody has any questions of the panelists. It takes a minute.
If you have any question,
Okay,
please
Brad's
raise
got
your
a question.
hand and wait for the
Gabby's got a
microphone.
question, watch out.
Is on?
Yep.
Thank you all so much. I feel much closer to all four of your work after listening to you speak about it. My question is to each one of you, why do you think figuration is having a moment right now, as your moderator pointed out?
Maybe there's just a lot of good figuration happening right now, maybe.
Maybe there's a change of narratives, and it seems like it's contingent with the politics to me. With the change of political landscape, there was maybe an urge also to change some of the art world landscape, and so maybe some new energy coming from, the figuration side. I don't know. These are extrapolation, but and I don't know if I can really explain it better. But this is just my intuition about it.
I think there's a really dumb answer, which is that social media works better for figurative representational images. I just feel like what a depressing answer. I'm sorry to give it, but don't you think that's true, Kathy?
I'm not going to believe that.
Oh, no?
No, I mean, I don't know. That could play into it, but I think that what you're talking about is really important. First of all, I'm really glad that it's happening, obviously, because for a decade I was just a weird person in my basement making paintings of people, and everyone who came over was like, "Why are you doing that?" But I think for me, I always worked figuratively, but in the last few years with the political situation, what it is, I think a lot of us were under the impression that there were some general understandings socially and politically that were kind of a given that we then realized weren't a given. And I personally was like, oh, I think you have to be really direct in the way that you communicate and maybe go back to like the most basic way that you know how to do that. And for me, that was just making paintings with people in them with like really concrete, explicit ideas about what I want to say. And I don't know how to do that with abstraction, but maybe that's my own, shortcoming or something. But for me, it was just like the most direct way to like address ideas about people, humanity, which seems to be in some trouble. I don't know.
But can I also just say that I don't believe in the ostensible, whatever the moment thing. I feel like that's happened so many times, as Kathy, like painting is back, or figuration is back, or representation is back, it's seldom that abstraction is back. Maybe people, maybe 7-8 years ago there was a little bubble, but I feel like really the situation has been the same. To me, that's my own take on it, is that there's this kind of pluralist, shapeless thing, has little tidal ups and downs, but I think the situation has been pretty continuous. That this is a kind of talking point, and that with some market elements to it.
Yeah, but you mentioned like social medias, and I agree with that too. I think social, a small square, definitely an image. Like there's a lot of art practices that don't translate via Instagram or social media, and totally recognize that the fact that in that way we do have an advantage as figurative painters.
Or if you can take a selfie in front of it.
Right.
Kusama.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
The question?
This is a question for Jenna. Could you speak about your choice of scale in your painting?
Sure. I've always really loved small paintings. It's my favorite thing to go and, see a Vermeer or something, and just like what can happen in a very limited amount of space. And so I've gone back and forth, but painted small paintings throughout my life. But then I guess I had a sort of turn toward making much more intimate work. And to me, it felt right to do that on a very small scale, because how intimate can it be if it's gigantic? But so at my show that I had this past September at Fredericks and Freiser, there were kind of the smallish, small to medium-sized paintings that were more intimate, and then a lot of the wrestler paintings were larger, and it felt like those were more staged experiences. So I kind of treated a large canvas like a stage, something that you could almost like imagine walking into or viewing in that way, whereas the small ones were almost looking through the eyes of someone, and it's just the scale is more personal.
Any other questions?
I guess this is just a question for any of you that might think it's relevant. Thinking about color, that's maybe where I see in a lot of these paintings where abstraction enters in, where the painting becomes constructed almost apart from, the figure and the subject matter. So, I don't know, anybody?
Totally.
I was making my way actually back to Todd's work, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for me personally, a lot of times they start as a sort of abstract mess, and then things kind of come out of them. And thinking about like breaking up the form or abstracting the figure, a lot of times sort of compromises have to be made if you want it to sort of, the orange bit to be in this place. Like, so I mean, for me, that's something I feel like the paintings work because of the abstract decisions that get made early on. Like, I want it to be a painting first and then have a figure. Like, it doesn't need a figure, except that I just wouldn't really know when to stop. Or it would just like sort of go and go. But you put a figure in there and you're like, oh, well, I mean, you can tell that's a hand. I don't have to paint that anymore,
All right.
I'm hungry.
Thanks. Okay. All right, well, thank you all very, very much.